Good evening. A little behind tonight. Of course, I wasn't really even supposed to be here. I was supposed to be in Tennessee. But the wife had found out some news that wasn't necessarily the good kind of news medically. So we elected to stay at home. So what I'm working on, or going to be working on here, doing a demonstration for the Wednesday night worldwide wood turning group in a couple weeks, like 2 weeks. I'm going to true this up, and then we'll see where we're going. And I need some stuff. I'm going to do if you've followed me on here, you've seen me do it before. Some of the grain filling stuff. And that's what I'm going to do for them. So I'm getting some stuff ready for that. This is what you call not having a really great day with a chainsaw, because it's not exactly a very nicely cut piece. But we'll make it work. Considerably thicker and cut on a curve and all that good stuff. So once again, that's where sharp tools, even a chainsaw. I think that chainsaw there actually has died on me, but what it really was all about was the fact that the bar was shot. So I was pretty much unable to cut a straight line in it no matter what I did. So this will probably just be sort of a shallow bowl. So first things first is we're going to face it off, and we'll put a tenon of some sort over here so that I can grab a hold of it. This will be some slow speed kind of turning for now, because this thing is well out of balance because of that, because of all the goofy bad stuff in it. So we'll just take skim cuts off there. Get it make it flat on this side anyhow. So that should be not quite. Still a little bit of chainsaw mark left, so grainy orientation's going that way. think we'll take a little bit more off of it. At least in here. I'm not really too concerned about it being totally clean out in there. Just we'll put a tenon on in there. Somewhere in there. It'd be a fairly good size one. I'm scribing with the left leg and never let the right leg touch. We need some room for the chuck jaws. And we'll put a little dovetail on it. Nice and flat in there, or even a little bit concave. Fine. Right now we can go directly to the chuck. That'll make life a little easier. And then we'll get the other side. Trued up. And then we can figure out where we're going from there. Probably just do it's really too thick for a platter because it's it'll be well over 2 inches thick. We'll see once here. We're not make any decisions till we get all the facts straight on it. So I'm going to put it in there with the grain and the jaws. Tighten it up. Since this is so out of whack here, we'll probably bring the tailstock back up. Because there's no point not to at this stage of the game. I might as well have a little extra support. Never hurt anybody. Because we're 2 3/8 there, and I think we're over 3 inches there. Yeah, so it's only going to hit in one place to start. So I'm going to go to I get a vibration, which, like I say, is very low at this point because it's only going to hit out here. Then we got about halfway around. This has some different sort of grain pattern to it, or I should say coloration more than anything. Just looking at whether I could make this the bottom. I could probably leave it a little bit thicker that way, maybe. Not. Still not round in there. We're getting closer. We're getting closer to being in balance. Still have one patch of chainsaw to get rid of. If this wasn't ash, I'd say this would make a nice chip and dip kind of a bowl, but I don't particularly care to make that kind of thing out of an open grain wood. Just not, to me, not what I want to do. But I do need a flat area, and there we go. Now we're flat on the bottom. Let's go out here in this corner and sort of true the rest of this up. And then we can see what we have left. And 2.5 inches thick. Thank you for the follow there, Macaulay. Getting dandruff here tonight already. I have this thing marked that it's ash, and it certainly looks like ash, but it doesn't. I mean, granted, I've cut it nice and smooth, but there is some grain showing. At this point, then we can get rid of our tailstock. Think about what for foot we want to use. You do some wood turning or anything with the wood? Okay, this thing, guess, do both angles here once. See what they do. It's a fun hobby. That's pretty much all. That's pretty much what I view it as. So about 11 inches on the outside, somewhere thereabouts. So if we divide that by 3, we probably want about a 3.5. That's always the challenge. Place to work. Myself, my shop is in the basement here. I'm in central Pennsylvania, so I want that one. I love my Vicmark chucks, but we go from the jaws that's on there, which I think they consider them, I don't know, 3 inches. Then we go up to the next one up is like 4 3/8. I think we'll just make a curve and just assume that I'm going to use that one. Oh, okay. I can't help you there. I'm a US kind of guy. The worst part about a garage shop, or any of those types of shops like that, is the fact that now you have to heat it, and maybe depending on how hot it would get where you're at, you need some sort of climate control. Which can always be a bit of a challenge. Oh, that's right, this is ash. I gotta turn the dust collector on. I'll be choking to death. Ash is very dusty when it's dry. And this is very dry. Hard to say how many years this has been around. Oh, yeah. I don't. Never been there, so I'll take your word for it. Hmm. That's got to be some of the smoothest ash that I've ever seen. And there's. I slow down and go really nice and gentle when I get down to the end. It shouldn't splinter it up too bad. Watch somebody else make a mess. I'm pretty good at that. The mess part, anyhow. This is going to be a very shallow bowl, but It's kind of the foot size that I want, but I'm not really used to putting up with the thing of what my trouble right now is. I want a good way of gripping it, but I also want. So if I go down to the next one, not going to leave me quite as much as. Uh, this is what you call design as you go. You'll find if you watch me, I do a lot of that. I don't necessarily have a design in mind when I get started. A lot of people like to talk about, I let the wood tell me what it wants to do, but it's kind of a fictitious kind of a thing as far as I'm concerned. And you'll just give it a little bit of a curve. And back up into here into nothingness. I want to keep the diameter as much as I possibly can. I'm going to use that as a tenon. It's going to need to go down further yet. Let's to just like a little foot, just something to make it sit up off the table a little bit. That's really all I'm after there. It makes them look a little better. Of course, that's sort of just it's my opinion. I think that'll work. establish my tenon here that I'm going to grab onto. And then it'll just have it'll sit on that then. I'm going to make that curve a little nicer. I'll go to a smaller profile. Still a bowl gouge, it's just smaller. It'll allow me to get in here and make this curve a little bit nicer and a little bit tighter maybe. It's all about the lesser sanding that I have to do. I think that'll work. Like I say, it's going to be just simple, sort of a simple shape just to be able to do for the demonstration. And I'll explain that and show you a little bit more about what that's all about here in a bit. So this, I'll go back to my traditional scraper just to smooth up some of those little marks that I just left in there. Remove the burr, and I'll come back up here and put a little bit of a burr back on. This is just a CBN hone. I don't really need a big hairy burr on there, just enough that I can feel it. This is probably about ready to go back to the grinder and grind the fresh one on. Tool rest height needs to be a little bit above center. This has to be pitched downward, or it will let you know when it's not. And it's very unfriendly when it lets you know that it's not. I'm just really more interested in just that one little area. I could probably go the whole way up actually. It'll save me time sanding wise. It's a very gentle touch, as you can see. It's actually has given me a pretty clean surface. It's given me a nice clean surface, easily sandable surface. Which is where we'll go from there. And we will sand in reverse. Does a better job for the dust collection, as you'll see. Stuffs it right into the old trusty chute. And I'll stop and take a look and make sure. Give it a feel. It's going to feel like it was sanded with 120 grit paper, but I'm more interested in no tool marks. Because the process this is going to get done where I'm going to dye it and then fill the grain. The surface has got to be very, very clean. Because the grain filler, if you had any torn grain or anything like that, the grain filler will just go in and fill them for you. And it'll stick out like a turd in a punch bowl. Now, it's a 1.5 horse dust collector. What I have here, I mean, that's a 4-inch hose. There's actually a cyclone separator in between this and the main dust collector. Yeah, it does. It does a wonderful job. Especially on the lathe. There's certain stuff that I might do woodworking wise that is not maybe necessarily the best dust collection. I gotta do a good. I gotta be able to keep the dust wrangled up and staying in here. You know, like I say, it is in my house, so I don't want to be handing the trusty dust cloth to go dust everything off that I made a mess out of. So we'll go right through the grits. I generally go up to 800. It doesn't take very long, as you can see. That's the bottom side of our bowl complete. I was thinking when I was cutting it out, I didn't have much of the open grain, but there is plenty of it there. Now we can flip it around, switch chucks. A smaller footprint. And that outside edge right now is like a little razor blade. It's actually almost Sharp. It's actually sharp to the touch, me just grabbing a hold of it. It's one of the things you got to be careful of when you're turning, to make sure that I should have been knocking that edge back, but especially once I've sanded it like that, that just turned it into a real razor blade. So now we can get the top squared away. If I did everything right, this should run through, which it does. So we'll get back up to our turning speed. And there is still some out here that's not through yet. Temptation is always to touch that with your finger, but there's still a little bit left. But I need to make this a little bit of a curve here. Soften that edge up a little bit. And I'll make a little bit of a curve going inward as well. And then I'll take I won't actually hollow this out because of what I'm going to do to it, but I am going to get rid of a little bit of this material. It'll just sort of help me keep the die where I want the die to be, not everywhere I don't want it to be. As you'll see here in a couple minutes, just about got this one whipped into shape. I'm going to clean up this little bit down here. And we'll go back to dividers, and I'll shrink this tenon down in there. That way that's a little less messing around the night of the demonstration, that I don't have to change chucks. Knock the other little razor blade off. And we'll give that a quick sand. Gotta get fresh sandpaper for that job. slow things down considerably. I'm gonna sand. I'm not gonna power sand this. I'm gonna sand this by hand. So if I go too fast, it'll generate a ton of heat, which of course transfers to your fingers. So it's not a nice situation. Soften the outside edge up nicely. Looking for any picked up grain or anything silly like that. I don't see any. This outside rim will shrink as I go once it gets dyed and all that good stuff. I always break the edge of the sandpaper over something, either the tool rest or the edge of the waves of the bed. Breaks the glue in between the grits. Makes it a little bit more pliable. And you were saying about the dust collector earlier that this is actually a new one because my other one crapped out on me. The motor crapped out. And you couldn't get a replacement for it. So I ended up replacing the whole thing. But I did get a remote control this time for it, which unfortunately is rather expensive for them. In the neighborhood of like $100 just for a stinking little remote control in the box to go with it, but saves me a lot of walking back and forth. So that's kind of a nice plus. The grain fillers work best with black. You could do it with a... Well, that's something I didn't... I think that was kind of the... I say it was kind of the demise of my other dust collector. I talked to him, bought some plywood off of a guy that... Longtime woodworker. And I saw him go over and hit a button to turn his dust collector off. And I'm like, oh, what for remote control do you have? I said, they're all so expensive. He's like, no, they're not. You can get these simple ones on Amazon for like 20 bucks or $25 or something like that. And he showed me right what they were called and where to go looking at. And I'm like, well, that's kind of interesting. What I did, I sprayed some denatured alcohol in there. That's going to open the pores of the wood back up for me. It'll accept the dye a little bit better. So I did. And it's kind of like, wow, you know, why didn't I do this 20 years ago? But for the most part, if I'm doing cabinet work, I have my earmuffs on anyhow, so it really didn't matter. I mean, I would come down and for the most part would turn the dust collector on and it would stay on the entire day. I'm looking at dyeing this purple, and I had that and I used it for several months. I'm not sure that's going to be dark enough. Yeah. Well, the shop vac is a little bit different. These dust collectors, especially the old one that I had, they draw a good amount of amperage when they start. So I sort of feel that that's maybe what knocks something out in the motor. And I checked with some of the people that work on electric motors in my area. And the one guy was really helpful and really, you know, tried to, he's like, we can just get you a new motor. Well, and lo and behold, you know, it comes from overseas, so everything's metric. He's like, man, he said, called me back a couple of days later and can't find you a motor. And I'm like, well, can you fix the one that I got? And I'm like, there used to be years ago, and of course there again, you know, we're all getting a bit older, so the guy that used to work on electric motors, it really wasn't very far away from me. I mean, he was slick with them. Yeah. Because my dad has an old, what is it, a Rockwell Delta? Or no, not, I forget. It's a really old radio arm saw that he's had for good, I'd hate to say how many years he's had it. And it needed motor work done to it at one time. And he took it down to this guy, and he literally rewound the motor and it basically almost created a brand new motor for him. Well, of course, you know, like I say, we all get a little older, and you know, he's no longer around. And I guess that's sort of a dying trade in some ways. Because I know at work, if they have a motor that causes them trouble, why, you know, our wonderful throwaway society, they just throw away and buy a new one. Yeah, well, I mean, I think the one place that I got a hold of, they might still do that, but they're not geared for the small motors like what, you know, the dust collector would have. You're talking about a 1.5 horse motor. You know, they're dealing with the big horsepower motors and 3-phase and all that stuff. Didn't spray it with alcohol. Shows. Takes more dye to penetrate this way because the first coat, the dye is alcohol based. But yeah, when I asked the guy about fixing it, rather than trying to find a new one and all that good stuff, why, he's like, well, we probably can fix it, But he says, I'll tell you right now, he says, it is not cheap. I'm like, okay. I said, what do you mean by not cheap? He said, well, he said, bring it in and have us look at it. I'm thinking like, 40, 50 bucks or something. Oh, man. Left scratch lines where I sanded by hand and got over the top. That sucks. Now we're going to take this die right back off and resand this. Or at least resand the top edge. Don't think the camera won't pick it up, but there's some distinct lines. But since I was a little suspect on that not having much open grain like I thought it would, we'll put a little grain filler in there and see what it'll do, because I'm going to sand it back off anyhow. But I think he said their shop rate was $125 an hour or something like that. And of course, minimum would have been an hour to diagnose or whatever they wanted to call it. So he said it's really not in your best interest to go down that path, I guess you'd say. Yeah, that's going to work. Yeah, that'll work. That really probably doesn't show up hardly at all on the camera because that's what I picked up was purple. But what it'll do, it'll fill in. Open grain woods have the growth rings will have open pores, and they'll be in a kind of a random kind of pattern there. So I elected just to bite the bullet and buy a new one. Of course, the new dust collector was almost, well, until I got the remote control for it, you're looking at $1,000. Which is not what I wanted to do, but should have 2 gloves on to do this work too, because now I got black fingers. And now we're going to go back and resand, at least sand that top edge. Now you'll be able to see what I was talking about. You can see the line that's running around there. That's where I sanded with sandpaper and didn't sand through the grits. This is kind of an interesting look too. Is to dye it black, and then sand it back. Really makes it sort of highlight some areas. quite all of them, but I think as we go through, it'll get the rest of them. Yep. Make sure I keep a nice rounded over edge up at the top. The dye really doesn't do any favors to the sandpaper. That particular one there has a little bit of shellac in it. I'm surprised it didn't clog up the first grit, but it didn't seem to. Now we're back to where we started. I have to try that one of these days because, like I say, that kind of left a different look to it. But you can see as I spin it around, you can see where the open grain is at because the black stayed down in the grain. So that's what will inevitably what I'm going to do with the grain filler. We'll go down in those pores of that grain and make it stand out. So this time we'll spray it with the alcohol so it penetrates a little easier. Also why the dust collector got turned off. I want to suck that up into the dust collector. And need to go back to my gloves. Actually, I'll get 2 new gloves. They're right here. So just wipe off any of the excess alcohol that's laying on there. And now we can go back and dye it again. might have to try that sometime. Just put the dye on and sand it back off like that. Kind of gives it a different look. Huh. How are you doing? But for this purpose, I want it black. Not too bad. My vacation kind of got canceled out on me, so we're gonna get some quality shop time in this week. At least that's my plan. Yeah. I'll go over it like twice here. Try and get it a nice uniform black. And sanding is definitely the key when it comes to putting dye on things. It will highlight any scratches that may have been left behind, which is why it just got resanded, because there was some scratches. So just wipe off the excess. And that's another piece ready for the demonstration. Trying to think how many I have. 1, 2. This will be number 3. I have 3 of them. They're already black. So that's probably enough of them. The inside hasn't been taken out yet because I'll do the grain fill first. So if I was going to proceed on, then I would get my airbrush and shellac and spray a coat of shellac on top of this. And then that has to dry. No. Of course, there is multiple ways of turning things black too. One of which is kind of fun. If you're a little bit of a person that likes to play with fire a little bit. This one won't necessarily totally show you. I should have got the piece. I'll get the piece that's finished. This one was actually done with a torch. I turned it, sanded it, and then took it outside and used a torch to burn. And what happens there is it burns out the softer grain. It still leaves it open, but it burns the softer grain quicker than it burns the harder grain. So this is going to have a texture to it, as well as being as well as I'll go back and fill the grain in with a color. They come out kind of neat. A little bit more work, but it's all good in the end. I'm really supposed to be finishing other work, which is where we'll go in a bit. But here's what it looks like when you torch it. That had its coat of shellac on it. The grain has been filled. It needs another coat of shellac over top of that yet. It almost looks like I need to go back and put a little more grain filler in a couple places that I missed. And then this will get lacquered over top of that. And there's also a lid for it. This one I did in a class years ago. Actually, I just redid the outside of it. So the reason it hasn't gone any further is I'm thinking I might take the color off of the inside and leave the inside natural. Oh, I know what I was going to do. Like I say, I'm supposed to be finishing work, not really starting new work. Put this stuff away because I do have a piece from last week that needs the back of it done. Yeah. Well, when you're a wood turner, and I deal mainly with wet wood, so you rough turn them when they're wet, let them dry for 8 months to a year or more, and then you go back and turn them again the second time. So this is a piece from last week. It was last week. But I did the inside, finished up the inside. This one has some epoxy in it, where there was a sort of a rotten spot there. So I filled it with epoxy. Like I said, the inside is finished. It actually already has this finish on. So what we're going to do here is finish up the outside, finish up the foot and the outside. And then that'll be another one that's in the finished category. Almost finished. So even though it has rubber on that, I'm still going to put some paper towel inside of it, just so I don't leave any witness marks. This one also has a tiny little, almost like a little Morris taper down there that centers it up quite well for me. This one doesn't need much as far as turning wise goes. It's mainly going to be sanding. I got to finish up, figure out what I want to do with this foot. Its foot needs to be a little bit smaller than what it is, or make it into a bead, one way or the other. And it should spin pretty true. Certainly true enough to do what I'm going to do, or what I need to do. First things first, we're going to shrink the foot down a little bit. Yeah, but you won't like my answer. Because everybody likes to be cheap when it comes to a lot of that kind of stuff. This chuck right here, I like the Vic Mark chucks, but they are not cheap. Well, almost none of the chucks anymore are cheap to start with. But myself, the Vic Mark is probably that isn't something I come up with. That's going to a lot of symposiums and stuff like that. A lot of the professional turners, that's their chuck of choice, unless they're somehow sponsored or something like that by somebody else. But I mean, you're looking at about $300 for. This is the bigger one. This guy here, that's probably my most used one. But you only buy it once. That's the real key. Is you go to Woodcraft or something like that, and you buy one of these Nova G3s for, I don't know what they would be now, maybe $140 or $150 or something like that. And they're just, you pay for what you get. You know, you create yourself frustration is what you do when you buy some of the lesser stuff. And a lot of people recommend some of that stuff, you know, because their philosophy is, well, you're just starting out, you're just learning and whatnot. And I'm like, I get that part, but if you buy cheap tools, you just get frustrated with it because you think you're doing something wrong when some of it could be there's, trying to think who sells them. What the hell's the name of them? The Axminster? No. SG. I know there's like an SG1 and SG2. They're supposed to be pretty good, and they're not. They're not nowhere. They're much less than the Vic Marks are. But whatever one you get, my recommendation is to have the dovetail jaws rather than. Let's see if I can grab one. Like the Nova would come with. There's their standard jaws. Their standard jaws are pretty much straight up and down. They do have a little bit of a lip up here, which is supposed to make them stronger, but it doesn't really. Which doesn't make sense because when they go to the bigger size jaws for the Nova, then they're sort of dovetailed. But they're not, you know, to buy a better size in what fashion? Size for your lathe is really the key, and the size of work that you want to do, or can do, I should say. You know, you're certainly not going to, if you went out and bought one of the little mini lathes, like my dad has a little mini lathe, the little Jet 1221, which are not cheap themselves anymore to buy. They're $1,000 to buy the lathe, but there's also a lathe, or if you go with a small lathe like that, I can't tell you the model number. I'd have to look it up. I mean, if you want me to, sometime I could look it up for you. Grizzly makes a chuck. It's a clone of this little guy, of the Vic Mark, the VM100. And they're only about $140. At least that's what they used to be. Now it comes with the standard jaws, and I think they only had one other set of jaws for it. It came with a standard one, which would do about 1.25 inches, 1 3/8 on the inside, and like 1 7/8 on the outside to expand into something. And that's the one my dad has. I talked him into buying one years ago, and it's never caused him any trouble. So, you know, if you're going to have a small lathe, it's more than big enough for that. And the size, you know, I've turned 10 or 12-inch bowls on that small of a tenon. You know, it's making sure the tenon is properly sized and some other little factors involved in it. But yeah, it was actually kind of it was actually impressive that, because when I fast talked him into buying it, I'm like, well, you know, if it lasts for a handful of years, why, you know, it's worth the money. But I always forget about that when people ask me that. But that's actually a good little chuck. Like I say, this needs sanded on the outside. I'm going to go around the edge first without it spinning. But I would definitely stay away from the cheap Nova. There's a bunch of other ones out there, like Penn State Industries has some stuff, and they're just not, you won't be happy with it down the road, put it that way. And you'll be thinking that you're doing something wrong, and the whole time it's because the truck is not machined properly. Yeah, the Axminster, the one that's available in the States? I think it is. I think that's the SG. If their model numbers are SG, that's the Axminster. They're supposed to be pretty good. I've never used one, but I don't have a need to use other than what I already have. So, and as you see, I have well, technically I have 5, but the Nova, it really never sees the light of day. It has some real little pin jaws on it that from time to time I may use that to do like some finials or something like that. But it's never going to be used for something that I'm going to do just what I was doing earlier, where I flip it around, because they're not machined well enough to do that. I'll sand this little bead complete, and then I'll go back to power sanding. But almost all the stuff has gotten very expensive. I wish you would have talked to me before. I would have said not to buy a set. There's too many tools in that set that you don't need. and maybe it won't even use because they're really, those sets are designed for spindle turning. Some of them, I guess, do come with a bowl gouge, but generally the sets are not the route to go. Even though that's what everybody likes to do, it's like I got late. I'm gonna get a set of tools while I'm at it. And I'm like, not necessarily the way to go. Because if you watch me long enough, you're gonna figure out that I use pretty much 3 tools. I do have a whole drawer full of tools, but I mean I have some specialty tools. But for the most part, I'm using 3 tools. Now, granted, that those 3 tools and a quality tools is going to cost you $150 or $200, but it's going to last you a long time. But like I say, there's lots of people out there that, you know, even some pretty experienced turning people would recommend to buy a cheap set of tools just to learn how to sharpen. And my opinion on that is you don't learn anything because you think you're going to do something wrong. Right, but you need to, the bottom line is you need to learn how to turn before you worry about bowls. You need to learn how to do spindle work because that is the root of all turning. Is the spindle work. As you look at it in simplest terms, everything you do in the turning world, for the most part, is either a bead or a cove or a flat or a disc. So once you learn all those basics, then all the rest becomes kind of elementary. And practice on a piece of 2x4. You have a table saw, get a little chunk of 2x4 and cut it into an 1.5-inch square. Put it between centers and work on turning beads and coves. And when you get it figured out how to cut a 2x4 clean, as in no sanding required, then you're ready to move on to something else. One guy at my dad's woodworking club, well, he comes to our turning club too. He keeps saying he's going to come over and spend some time and do a quick lesson. I said, I hope you like to turn 2x4s. And he looked at me like I was crazy. I'm like, because that's what you're going to turn. I said, anybody can take a piece of hard maple and turn something with it, and generally we'll get a good result because the wood is so hard. It's when the difference becomes really evident when it becomes a softer wood. Or they like to use carbide. Carbide has their place, but you better like the sand because you will be doing a lot of it with the carbides because they are nothing more than a scraper. And they're very expensive. You're talking about a chuck. You looked at any of the carbide tools? Oh my gosh. They're just ridiculous. And the better part, I don't like that. I won't pick on a name brand, put it that way. But probably one of the really more expensive ones that everybody knows about is they come up with a bright idea a while back, probably a couple years ago now, that we'll come up with the next big gimmick and we'll put a negative rake on our carbides. Well, that just screwed you, because a carbide can be sharpened with a simple diamond hone. But as soon as they make it into the dual angle, the dual bevel, like for the negative rake, now you have no way of sharpening it. At least I don't. I've talked to some people that have them, and I'm like, well, when that thing gets dull and you're ready to throw it away, throw it in my direction. I said, I want to see if I can sharpen it, and I think I probably can, but it would be very difficult versus the flat ones, because the flat carbide are actually very easy to sharpen. Most people don't do it. I don't know why they don't, but because those, I mean, it's around, I have one around here somewhere. Most of them are pretty easy. Once again, there is some things out there that can help you with that, make that life easier. Once again, nothing is free. Nothing is free in the wood turning world, unfortunately. You probably already own a grinder. Most people do. So you can, what they consider freehand grind. It's easier if you have like the bigger platform. Once I put the finish on, I can go over. I don't know if I can move that camera to actually get you a better view, but I could show you a couple different ones. Well, I can sharpen all my tools while I'm there. It's not real hard. Like I say, there is some jigs and such things that'll make that life easier, more repeatable is what I'm after. So we're going to put our finish on. This is the Parfix 3408. It's a slow setting CA glue. That's what's already on the inside of this bowl. This is what I finish the majority of my stuff with. That's all right. They don't need to be wide. You're only going to use pretty much the center of them anyhow. One of my wheels is wide because that's just what I bought that time. But the other one is not. The other one's only a 1-inch wheel. It is a CBN wheel, but nonetheless, it's still only a 1-inch wide wheel. So we're going to rub this in good, especially up along the edge. Along the edge is going to soak in more. There's a little bit of the, tiny little bit of the cambium layer that stays behind on the edge of on a natural edge piece like that. It's also a place that I'll probably have to sand a little bit once the glue sets up and cures. But it's very simple to do. And it has a 40-second time delay. And no odor. If you've ever worked with super glue, you would be amazed. Just in that standpoint alone, that it has no odor to it. Because if I was to put that amount of super glue, normal, everyday super glue on something, you would almost want to wear a respirator or have good ventilation or both, because the toxic fumes that comes off the cheap stuff. So that's it. Wipe it on, wipe off the excess. I don't want anything sitting on the surface. I just want what got soaked into the surface, into the grain, into the pores of the wood. Very simple. From there, it's going to cure, which will take 24 hours. And then I will buff it. I'm going to activate it because I want to take it off and continue on with something else. So, a couple little squirts of the activator at a distance, not up close and personal. No matter whose super glue you're using. Spray it at a distance, let the mist land on it, and drop it into dust. But it's already set up enough, especially with a gloved hand, I can easily touch it. If I have any moisture in my ungloved hand, then you could run into a place that might be sticky. But there's our epoxy fill. Comes out kind of neat, especially if you take and put some bright light under it. Like if you were to take that to a craft show and there'd be some nice, be an outdoor craft show or something like that, and the light would shine through it. That jumps out at people quickly. Okay, let me see what I have set up at the grinder. So let's grab our bowl gouges. Bowl gouges, spindle gouge. I just grab a whole bunch of them and we'll go over to the grinder and we'll sharpen a whole bunch. I needed something else in here. The spindle gouge, the good parting tool. All the parting tools need sharpened. I'll take these over and I'll switch the camera back over to there. And we'll try and explain to you how I do it. Is this the best way to do it? It works for me. That's what everybody will tell you. That's the other thing when people in the wood turning world will tell you, well, you got to figure out which grind suits you best. It's like, well, how do you do that? That was my question from day one. It's like, how do you do that? Well, you know, you just keep playing around with it. Well, the whole time you're playing around with it, you're burning through tools. But there is some simple sort of ways to set some things up to make that life a little easier. So let's see, what do we have in the grinder? Yeah. You know, I've never come up with a really good way of showing the grinder, except you can see the white streak because of that's not wood dust from the shop, that's metal dust. So what are we set? We're set up to do the spindle gouge first. Let me get one more tool. This is sort of a high, I'll call it a high, sort of a high-end grinder platform. Not necessarily the one I'd say you have to buy, but it is very, very nice compared to the Wolverine grinding platform. I'll put it that way. So what did I say we're going to start with? We're going to start with a spindle gouge. This is a 1/2-inch spindle gouge made by Doug Thompson lathe tools. They're very hard. They're made out of 10V steel. They last a very, very long time. But they are hard. They are very hard on stone grinding wheels. That I will tell you. They will wear a stone grinding wheel out very quickly because they are so hard, and you're utilizing one little area of a stone all the time. That's why I say you don't need to 1.25 wide grinding wheels, because as you'll see, I use a 2-inch setback. Some people use 1.25 inch, 1.75 inch. There again, use what you feel comfortable using as far as that goes. This is a different grinding jig than like the Wolverine one. Just a matter of laying it on there, coming up around, go to the other side, coming up around. And now I have a nice uniform bevel the whole way around. It's like I could go down a little bit lower. And that is sharp. I removed the heel on the spindle gouges just by virtue of I don't need the big heel, and the heel will get in the road on a lot of different cuts. So that's a simple spindle gouge using the jig setup to grind it. And go to the bowl gouges. I got to move the arm yet, but I'll get one set in here. Same deal. I'm going to use a 2-inch setback. The difference is the arm, which will be no different on the Wolverine system, which is probably the most popular one. It's going to be the same deal. I'm going to start over on the wing, and come up around. This bowl gouge is just about worn out. As you can see, when you look in here, this actually has a little V in it, which will grab a round bar fine and dandy, but when the flat part of that block can't go across the flute, then I don't necessarily get it in the jig the same every time. So that means in order to get my edge back where it belongs, I don't have it quite in quite right this time again. That means I'm going to remove more steel to get back to a sharp edge. Which in this one here, I really could, when it comes right down to it, could care less. I'm really trying to wear this one out because I want the round bar part to make something else. But that's the swept. That would be the swept back English or Ellsworth grind, English grind. You'll hear it referred to many, many different ways. Here's another one that's really short. This one is actually beyond the flute. The flutes are not even going to be back into the jig at all. So this one is really a matter of trying to eyeball it and not tighten it too tight so that I can move it. That's all there is to it. It's back to a nice, clean, crisp edge, I think. Maybe not on that side. if there's a downfall to the CBN wheels, is that there's no sparks, as you can see. So you can't necessarily see sparks coming over the edge to know that you got it back to a clean edge. That wheel there is 350, I think. Don't know that I would recommend buying a wheel that fine. The one on my left or your right is 180 grit. A lot of professional people will tell you that if you're only going to have one CBN wheel, buy the 180 or the 220. But don't think you're looking at the same kind of wheel as a stone wheel. Because if I was to go back and use the stone wheels, which I think I threw that one away because I get irritated with it very quickly. The stone wheels, because like I say, these, as you can even see on this one that there's a little 3/8, maybe a ½ inch, probably less than that, probably 3/8 of an inch. You can see there's a dark line running straight down the middle of that wheel. That's where the tool's being ground at all the time. So if you take a 3/4 inch or a 1 inch wide stone wheel and grind in the same place time after time after time, it wears them down, and it wears them down very, very quickly. It literally wears a groove in them. Yes. Does it have to be? No. A lot of people grind with the high-speed grinders. The difference there being is the high-speed grinders, you need to have a lighter touch. Doug Thompson of Thompson Lathe Tools, he uses a high-speed grinder, but he's also production grinding. And he knows that his tools, you have a very hard time heating one of these tools up. I mean, you can heat it up to where it'll burn your fingers, but you're not going to heat it up to the point of taking the temper out of the steel. Because I think he said that takes 22 or 2300 degrees. This is a different grind in a bowl gouge. I have the little one over here. I'll show you on the platform. This is one of the grinds that most of the professional people that use this particular grind a lot or all the time will tell you that it can't be ground using any of the jig systems. And personally, I say they're full of shit, because I spent the money and took a class from a guy down in Florida, and I'd already seen him demonstrate, and he's like, that's a piece of cake to grind at, because this tool was ground at 40 degrees on the nose angle as well as 40 degrees back on the wings. And they're like, well, you can't get the wings right. And I'm like, yes, you can. As you see, I'm moving it back and forth, and it's making that wing straight. And thereabouts 40 degrees. If I go back beyond 40 degrees, it don't make any difference. If you go forward of the 40 degrees, it will start to become aggressive. This is a spindle gouge as well. This is an old spindle gouge. And it will not, I don't think, maybe it'll make a liar out of me. I don't think I can get the 2-inch setback on it anymore. This is an old Sorby, which Sorby makes half-decent tools. But this one, no, I can't. It won't. The jig will not hold that one anymore. So this one you have to grind for basically freehand. The platform's already set. I like the 40 degrees on my spindle gouges as well. So this one's going to be set on the platform. The flute's going to face basically straight up. I'm going to go in on its side. This is where grinding on a platform can be challenging, especially with the handle on. And I'm going to swoop down to the nose. And that should give me a nice, clean surface around there. See if I can do it on this side without moving the grinder. Nope. Because I'm going to hit... This is why I don't like them with the handle. Handle gets in the road when you're grinding. And we're going to do the same side. And I'm not pushing hard against the grinder. It's just like the wood turning. I'm going to let the grinder do the work. I got to wait for it to slow down and stop now because I'm going to sharpen the parting tools. Where's my trusty little brake? One thing with the CBN wheels, when you put them on, because depending on whether I have that curtain pulled back very far, if I come over here and was to grind my tools and go back to turning, inevitably somebody's going to say, hey, you forgot to turn your grinder off. And I'm like, no, I didn't. It will run for several minutes because these wheels are machined. The insert on both of these are aluminum, so they are machined. They would be turned on a lathe, so they are extremely well balanced. So when it comes to that, the grinder doesn't know they're there. I said it wrong. At least I think I did. Try that one. Yep. So I cheat. I use a little block of wood and run it up against the side of the aluminum, which is not doing it any justice. It's scratching it, but it'll live. This is a little setup jig gauge that the fellow down in Florida gave me that he had made up. He was going to market them, but never did. This is it has 50 degrees and 60 degrees. That's an included angle. So if I take my parting tools are usually grounded at the 60 degrees. If I slide them in there, then that's going to be the angle on both sides. The angle is going to be the same on both sides as well. This one here is grounded at an angle. Just a matter of putting my thumb on it, going back and forth. It doesn't take much. Once they're ground to the shape that you want, it's only, one or two little passes across there and they're back to sharp. This one's the same way. It's grounded at an angle. This is an old Freud tool. So this does not have the hard steel. As you can see, I'm getting sparks out of this one. So that's all there is to that one. This is a straight parting tool. This one's going to take a little extra grinding because I usually am, a lot of times when I use this, I can be lazy and not set the platform and do this literally freehand. Most people don't like to do that. So that's back to sharp. Razor sharp. Also, when you're doing a parting tool, if you're going to buy a parting tool, I recommend the square-sided one rather than the diamond-shaped one. This will cut straight in. The diamond ones, you're only contacting a little point on the side, so it has a tendency to wander one way or the other, where the simple straight ones do a better job. So that takes care of most everything. Oh. You bought a set. This is probably one of the tools that came in the set. This would be known as a spindle roughing gouge. And the name depicts exactly what to use it for and only what to use it for. This is not to be used on a bowl. You will break it. This has a very small tang in it. And it has a big opening so you can... that's wrong. Wrong angle. That wheel is actually so smooth, as you can see. I put my fingers on it. I touch it every once in a while, even when it's running. Now, the 180 grit wheel has sharper edges on. I don't want to touch that one when it's running. That one has a tendency to bite a little bit. You can make your own little setup gauges. Just a little block of wood that I've laid up here on the side of the wheel. Trace the line. I cut it on the bandsaw. And actually, you really want to know, I actually brought it over here and literally put it on the grinding wheel while it was spinning. It doesn't grind wood very well. I'll put it to you that way. It actually burned it black. But it gave me what I wanted it to do. So these types of tools, it's going to be on the platform. I'm going to hold it up pretty much 90 degrees, roll it around, go to the other side, come back and roll it across the middle as well. And that's really all there is to that one. A very simple tool to sharpen. There is that particular 40 grind, as they would consider it. They say you should do it freehand, and that's going to look something like that. You're going to go straight across, drop it down, come back to the other side, come straight across, drop it down. It's not really that hard to, I mean, to me, I'd rather use the jigs. I can be more consistent. So if I'm grinding freehand like that, how long is it going to take you to get it figured out, to get things the way you want it to be? It's just, some of that's personal preference. I'm kind of lazy when it comes to some stuff, so I pretty much have had to jig, because none of the grinders, I don't care whose you buy, whether you buy one that's really expensive or really cheap, none of them come with any kind of a platform to grind turning tools. Or really most any tools. They come with this little platform that's only about 1.5 inches wide or something like that. So, you have nowhere to put the tool. This would be a sort of a skew. This is actually a negative rake scraper that I use, which, once again, it's ground on a platform. Yeah. So that's another expense, because the platform, just this left side platform, let's see, Stuart Batty's back to making them. $175, $180. I mean, they're not cheap. Not in the least. Actually, I think think that's the right one. But they are a nice platform. I went for many years without one. I originally bought the Wolverine system, and I still have it. I'm actually sort of tossing it around to actually buy a second grinder, because I do have another CBN wheel. The other CBN wheel I have is an 80 grit, which is great for removing a whole bunch of material, because I play around and make some little things that I need or want in my little turning world, and don't want to spend $100 every time I turn around because I want to try something new. This being a scraper, I'm only going to grind the one side, because this, I want the burr, if I run my finger across here, I can feel the burr the whole way across there, and that's what I want in the negative rake scraper. If that's askew, the angle is going to be longer, and then I would hone that burr off, or just use it and the burr will come off anyhow. So that's a handful of tools sharpened. So come back over here. It's not real rocket science, to say the least. But, you know, there is a fair amount of things that can make life a little easier. But, you know, there again, you don't got to go out and spend hundreds of dollars to get started. You know, you have a grinding wheel. Oh, I was going to show you. Even those little peewee platforms, there's some other. Yes, in some aspects. Like I say, the Wolverine system, which there again is, you know, I'm not sure what they are nowadays. 150 bucks more, maybe, more or less. Maybe closer to 200. But there again, it depends on what for tools you have. And you bought a kit, so that's primarily spindle turning tools. So you could get some sort of a better platform, or I've seen people make the platform. Probably if you look on YouTube, I bet there's somebody out there that'll show you that there's a simple wooden platform that they've made, because I've seen some of them. I've seen some people that have them that, you know, you could get away with doing your own. I mean, it's just a matter of your grinder's going to need to be mounted to that one's on a block or on a piece of plywood itself, bigger than the grinder is. But on a wooden platform, you could have a little extra out front, and it would be very similar to what I have my overhead camera mounted to. Be a connection point at the bottom, an arm that's two arms coming up, one on either side, and another place at the top. I probably can't draw it. So that the platform can pivot. And while you're at it, when the platform can pivot, then you can cut a notch back in so that the platform goes up a little bit beyond the wheel itself. That comes into play when you sharpen some other kinds of tools. They're mainly specialty kind of tools, but there's things that I need that extra piece up there, because it's going to go like this little guy. So in order to sharpen this edge down here, or at least get around this corner, I don't necessarily need this whole edge down here to be sharp, but I need to get around this corner down about halfway. So in order to do that on the grinder, that tool's going to be sticking up like that. So if the platform only goes to the edge of the wheel, then there's nothing out here to support that. So you almost have to like try and hold it on the grinding wheel and grind that otherwise, which is not an easy thing to do. Tools you can make yourself. You can make scrapers. That's just a piece of high-speed steel from Amazon. That's like $15. A fair amount of work goes into them. They aren't. I'm no machinist, so this is not very pretty, but that's always in the handle. This is a traditional scraper. This one's actually sharpened on the side as well, because I use this to make the lanterns. This is my recess tool to go inside of a lantern. But, you know, like I say, for $15, you can't go wrong. Same way with the big one that I used earlier, the bigger one. There again, that's a $15 piece of steel from Amazon. It's 8 by 30 by 200, which is all in millimeters. So 8 millimeters is a little over 1/4 of an inch. 30 would be 1.25 inches, I think. About 1 3/16 inches wide. 200 was about 8 inches long. They take a fair amount of work to make because it's going to come as a square blank. The biggest work is to make the tang to go down into a handle. But that's, you know, it's one of them things that I would, you know, will work on something like that during the week. I come home from work and have some dinner and whatnot, and I say, well, no, I'm going to go down and, you know, if I got one of them to do, I'm going to come down and I'm going to grind on it for 10 or 15 minutes until it gets hot enough I can't touch it, basically. And then I'm going to, you know, quit and go do something else and, you know, come back to it a little bit later on that day or whatever and just keep going after it. And there's certainly plenty of specialty tools out there that you can buy. But like I say, the 3 tools that I would recommend, and it's the 3 tools that I use all the time. And that would be those 3 guys right there. Parting tool. It doesn't have to be a $70 parting tool. It can be an inexpensive one that you could buy. I mean, you could go to Woodcraft and buy one of these probably for $25 or $30 maybe. I'm not sure on that. You could make this one. There's nothing says you can't make this one. It's just a matter of it's an 1/8 inch thick. So whatever that would be in millimeters, there again, it sticks out about 6 inch, 5 inches long. So if you got one of these at millimeter wise, let's see. So it's like 4 millimeters thick by, because everything you look at on Amazon is going to be in millimeters. So 5, 10, 12 millimeters wide. Probably by the 200 millimeters long. These are what Amazon calls all this high-speed steel on there is their fly cutters. Not a machinist, but I'm assuming that's some sort of something they would use in metalworking machining. Are they going to hold an edge as long as the expensive tools? No, but it will get you by. It works wonderful for some of the specialty tools that I may use, and that's really what I go after. You know, there's some stuff that I see people use or have seen them demonstrate using them, and it's like, well, I should have one of them. But lo and behold, one of which is Cindy Drozda, she has a little one that's to do the recess on a lidded box. This is a negative rake scraper, so it's ground on both sides. Her philosophy is 2 different angles, which just makes it more work, but this will go inside the recess, the recess of a lidded box, and it does a really nice job. It's easy to go in there straight if this is ground straight. This one actually, I just got some cutoff wheels for the angle grinder. I'm going to cut this one off back here beyond where I've ground at and start over with it, because I ground a whole bunch of material off in here, and it was a waste of time, because it could be that wide. But there again, it's a specialty tool. $15 at Amazon. It's only like 3/4 of an inch wide. Yeah, 3/4, whatever that, 20 millimeters wide by the 200 long, I'm sure. Yeah, I think almost all of that stuff is 200 long. I drew a tang on it off of one of my other tools, and I literally take it over to the grinder. I knock these sharp corners off, because these, when you get them, these are actually sharp. So I just literally take it across the grinder, whoop, back and forth, one time either side, so they're not sharp to my fingers, and mainly so they don't dig into my grinding platform. Doesn't matter what angle you set the grinding platform at. I usually just sit there and actually literally just roll this back and forth as I go across. It makes this a radius and just keeps shrinking it down. This one here is about 1/8 of an inch on either side. The big one is probably a whole lot more than that. But it's pretty simple stuff to do. But this is the 3 tools. That's why I say I wouldn't buy a set, because in a set you're going to get some tools that you'll probably never use. Last time I looked at a set, there was a tool in there that looks like this on its side, that's ground at a bevel down as a point. It's wonderful if you just want to use a point, but the problem with that is when they're ground on both sides, if you go into a piece far enough or go into a corner and both these sides contact at one time, it's an instant catch. It's an instant grab, and it's going to try and yank it right out of your hand, unless the tool is presented at a downward angle. It may not grab then, but chances are it will. What else they give you in a set? They want to give you a skew, one of the most time-consuming tools to learn how to use. But it's a good tool to learn how to use, but it's not friendly to somebody that's starting out, unless you have somebody standing there teaching you how to use it. Like I say, that's the 3 tools. And if you watch me turn, that's the majority of the time, that's what I'm using. 1/2 inch bowl gouge, parting tool, and my little 3/8 spindle gouge. Bowl gouge. 3/8 or a 1/2 inch bowl gouge. And when you're talking about sizes of tools in the U.S., all the U.S. manufacturers, you would have Thompson, D-Way. There's some other ones that you'll find. You got to be careful, like if you go to Woodcraft or something like that and look at some of them, some of the stuff that's made overseas, made over in England usually, they would refer to this bowl gouge as a 3/8, because certain places, and it's like I say, it's generally across the pond, they measure across the flute, and that's how they determine the size of the tool, the gouge, which would be a bowl gouge or a spindle gouge, rather than the U.S. goes by the size of the bar. So that you have to be a little bit aware of, because if you take I have 2 Sorbies. Where are they at? I just had it. Oh, it's still over there. No, I brought it back. Oh, there it is. If you take these 2 Sorbies, these are both bowl gouges. This one here, they considered a 3/8, because there again, they measure across the flute. But it's really, in my terminology, would be a 1/2 inch. This one here is sold as a 3/8 bowl gouge. Wait a minute. That's backwards. 3/8. I think this one was sold as a 1/2 inch, but it's actually on a 5/8 inch bar and a 3/8 inch bar, or 5/8 and 3/8. And they're not, and they're all done in millimeters, so it's actually over on both accounts as far as the size goes of the bar. But you keep them around. I mean, that's some of the stuff that I started with. That 3/8. When I first started, that was the number one tool that I bought, was this bowl gouge. I already had a bunch. I had a full set of Freud tools from back in the Stone Ages when I was 18 or 19 years old and bought a lathe out of high school and said, well, I gotta go, I'm gonna, buy a set of tools. I didn't have any way of sharpening them. I got somebody that had helped me sharpen them a little bit, but a lot of people don't understand that these tools do not stay sharp real long. Because just a simple terminology, that bowl that I was doing there earlier, you figure pretty much every 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes of your turning time is a mile or better of chips that went across a little area, because really when it comes right down to it, you're cutting from the nose back into about here. So you're looking at about a 1/4 of an inch area that a mile of wood just got cut by that little section. So stands to reason they don't stay sharp that long. They don't stay sharp forever, put it that way. And honing some of this stuff some of the stuff can be honed, but a lot of it does not lend well to the honing process. Any other questions? Because it's about time for me to call it a night. No problem. One good thing about wood turning, though, most of the wood is free. I do not buy very much wood. I need to address something. Because you can start with firewood, or what somebody's getting rid of as firewood, discarded instead of going to the dump or whatever. Because you can turn green wood. You can turn wood when it's very wet. You just have to leave it. You have to keep that in mind, that you are going to be turning a piece of wood that is wet. So there's other little stipulations that this is my beater. This is what I drive the drive center in with, this wooden mallet. This is a piece of black locust. I don't know if you have any of that out your way or not. I'm sure you do, but it's very much sought after by the people that burn wood. This stuff is as hard as a rock. Very, very dense. Very heavy in weight. But as you can see, over the years of pounding on a piece of steel, it's not in such great shape. But we're going to make it be in good shape. And I don't care whether there's a point left there when I'm done. But I'm going to put a drive center in. This is a steb center in the drive centers. This is more forgiving, so you're going to start out doing spindle work. This is the kind of center to use rather than the big teeth one, because this will slip. If you have the almighty catch in between centers, this will just cut a little groove in the piece of wood and literally let it slip. This one if these teeth are driven in there 1/8 of an inch or something like that, it's going to send that piece of wood into pieces. So this is, a lot of people would consider them a safety center. Really good for somebody that's new to the wood turning. So we need a tool rest. Tool rest height, for me, it's another one of them things that's sort of a personal preference on some of it. Some of it is where you want the tool to be cutting at. For the most part, you're going to cut on center or above, never below. If the tool gets below, if that tool comes in and gets below center, the wood has the upper hand on it, and it will take the tool out of your hand. This ought to be exciting because this thing has splinters everywhere. As you can see, it's not, I didn't exactly get a very good center mark down there. Not really concerned about it. I'm just going to skim off a little bit. I'm going to come up and I'm going to lay the tool on the tool rest. The heel of the bevel is up so that it's not making contact when it first starts. Like I said, this is going to be challenging because there's chips in the middle here. But we'll get it off there. I just don't want to eat one of them chips, that's all. They could be very sharp. See if we're getting there. Yeah, we're going to have to take a fair amount of material off to get to all of them. But like I say, they're like little shards. This thing is probably 10 years old or more. It's taken that long for it to beat itself to death. Because what it's doing when you're driving that is breaking the fibers of the wood. So we definitely need to get below that. So I'm going to come in a little bit on each side and tighten your tool rest up a little tighter than that. That was also me being a little bit aggressive on the cut. Come on. We might not get rid of all that. That one little, that must really be, it must really shatter them deep. Wow. Because it's still lifting them up. Interesting. Come back that way once and see what it does. It's looking a little better. That would be the spindle roughing gouge. Really the only thing, the main use for that tool is to take the corners off a square block of wood in a nutshell. Like I said, I'm going to go right back to my bowl gouge. And then it will allow me to do whatever I want to do for the most part in the spindle world. I can come up here, I can lay the side of the bevel on, and it will slice the wood. And you can see what the chips are coming off of it. I could show you, except they're all hitting the floor. I'm refraining from touching this because I know there's still places that it's sticking up. Right there's one of them. So we still need to get a little lower. I consider this cut to be the skew chisel that never catches. Basically, it's like a skew. The wood is coming down and meeting the cutting edge at about 45 degrees. So it's slicing the wood off rather than chopping it off. This thing was always too big anyhow. Chippy kind of wood too. That's the downfall running off the edge. That's okay because we're going to round that edge over a little bit. There's still a little bit of the grain standing up there, but for what this thing is going to be used for, not worried about it. Once again, I'm using my bowl gouge. Nothing says that I can't go and make a bead with the bowl gouge, because you can. It does a wonderful job. And you can take a bigger cut with the bowl gouge because it's the heavier tool. So that'll work. And you see, nice and cleanly cut on the ends, which is the hardest place to cut because you're cutting across end grain, or you're cutting end grain as you go around that corner. Try one more thing. Try a bevel supported cut. See if we can get past that place. Sounds better. Question is, does it look better? Yes. So now I got past the shattered fibers in there. So now our trusty little mallet is back to looking better. Smooth enough. We certainly don't need to sand it because we're going to beat on a piece of metal with it. So originally it was, but it's still plenty heavy. The wood carvers like this kind of a mallet to drive in, drive centers, things like that. Or their wood carvers would use it for, tapping on their chisels. I use it to drive in my live center or my drive center. So that's it in a nutshell. And that's it for me. Yeah, it's 9 o'clock. Time to go have some beverages and watch a little TV. Oh, yeah, you bet. Well, it looks like there's actually some people on tonight. Okay, well, I also do this. This is also being broadcast on YouTube as well. Um, so if you feel the need to go back and look at something maybe you think you missed or whatever, it's on YouTube under Kapps Kreations. So you can go back and look at that as well. So I'm going to go over here and end my YouTube's part of this. And I can go back here.